Okay, just waiting for people to log in. Okay, so tonight we're finishing off Bez Hashem halachas of Muktza. So we'll review the entire Muktza. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to send them on Hilchos Muktza at least. And the next 2 weeks, I think, next week for sure not. I can't give share next week, and then not the next week after that, I think. But I guess I'll post it if I can. And then we'll have to figure out another subject after this. Okay, so we're going to just do a quick chazara of all of Hilchos Muktza. So I hope I don't go too fast. If I'm going too fast, then please just post and let me know that I should explain it again, and I will gladly do that. Again, the shir tonight, as all the other shirim were, are the Lila Nishmas Yehuda Shimon Zichron L'Bracha ben Yeshua Yosef Moshe, and Ayelei Zichron L'Bracha ben Yeshua Adam Zalman, and the Shabbos should have an aliyah. Okay, so we'll start quickly and go through all of Hilchos Muktza. I'm working on, I'm not a chart guy, I'm trying to work on some sort of chart to send out, maybe with everybody's input tonight. Maybe we can figure out how to do it. Basically, what I've been trying to do is make like a question and answer, like make a list of questions for whether something's Muktza, and then if you answer yes, that means it's not Muktza, and if you answer no, you go on to the next level and see, and you answer another question, and you keep answering questions until you can figure out if the item is not Muktza. Meaning, if your answer would be no to everything, that means it's Muktza. If somehow you can get a yes in there, then that means the item would not be Muktza. But I'm having trouble figuring out exactly how to do that. But maybe we'll go through together and we'll try and figure it out. But okay, as a Hakdama, we said that Muktza is a Rabbanon, and the Rabbanon basically did it. There were a few reasons the Rabbanon did, but the main reason was to keep Shabbos more Kaddish. Because if you could just imagine what Shabbos would be like if you didn't have Muktza, right? So you'd be able to, even though you wouldn't be able to write with a pen, but you'd be able to move pens and cell phones and rocks and trees and sticks. So you can just imagine if that was all mutter, which it all is from the Torah. It's mutter from the Torah. So you can just imagine how it would be if we didn't have that. So that's what the Chachamim decided, that they're going to make things asur. Now, asur, when the Chachamim say something is asur, that means they have the wherewithal to be matir it in whatever scenario they felt warrants it. So they could have said something's asur, and then they say, okay, but in this scenario, it's going to be mutter. So that's an important point to understand with Hilchos Muktza, is that the Chachamim are the ones controlling this because they're the ones that made up the Isser. What's confusing about it is that we have to try and put ourselves in the minds of the Chachamim, which is obviously a very difficult thing to do, and we have to know when the Chachamim meant, what they meant, how they meant it, etc. What's us and what's not us. So basically, we're going to go through it, and we'll see what the Chachamim said is allowed and what they're not allowed. So basically, the first question that one should ask if they're trying to figure out whether something is Muktza. I'm sorry, before we just start, just to use an example that came up today in a discussion, is a roll of paper towels Muktza. Right now, as we know, you're not supposed to tear off paper towels because it's perforated, and that's like cutting something down to size. Same thing with toilet paper. So you're not allowed to use it. So would that be Muktza now? Because you can't, there's no use. So there's no use. So many places can say, yes, it is Muktza. But the question is, but maybe it's a utensil. What type of Muktza is it? If it's considered Muktza like a rock, you're not allowed to move it. If it's considered Muktza because it's a utensil, then you would be able to move it if you need the place that it's in, or if you needed the paper towel roll, let's say, to keep the door open or something like that, right? So depending on which type of Muktza it is, that's whether you'd be allowed to move it, right? And then you have certain ways that you'd be allowed to move it, even if it would be considered Muktza, which we discussed the last few weeks, which we'll get to. Right. So moving toilet paper, somebody just posted, can you move toilet paper so no one by mistake tears it? That could very well be that you can. It would depend on what type of muksa it is. So what I would say is it's really better to go with those that say that it's full muksa, and it's muksa like a rock. But we know that you're allowed to move a rock by moving it indirectly. So I would say is take it and certainly kick it, but if it's not on the floor and you can't kick it, so I would say to use your elbow if you can and move it that way, or take, let's say, a fork and a knife. I know that sounds a little bit strange, but move it, basically move it through something else, and then that would be okay. Right? So if there's a wet towel, somebody else is posting, if there's a wet towel from every Shabbos, and then something spills and you need a towel, can you use that one if it's nearby? So that would also depend on what type of muksa it is. So if you'd say that it's a utensil, then a utensil can be used for a necessary need. If you say it's not a utensil, then you can't. I would assume that a towel can go under the category of a utensil, and therefore would be okay. Now, if that towel is so saturated that if you touch it, it's going to end up squeezing things out, then you cannot move it, right? But again, the better you can certainly move everything with a shinu. Okay, fine. So let's go through it again, and then we'll see. But again, just another thing to keep in mind before we understand what muksa is, before we go through what muksa is to understand that muksa means, the translation of muksa does not mean usr, right? I think we mentioned this, that people seem to think that the word muksa means it's not allowed to be done on Shabbos. Like they say, oh, I'm not allowed to it's muksa to put the pot back on the fire on Shabbos. That would be an incorrect terminology. Muksa is exclusive to things that muksa means they're made, they're intended for something else. Meaning, if you don't plan on using something on Shabbos, meaning not that you don't plan it, but because then maybe if you have a shirt that you didn't plan on wearing, that's not muksa. Meaning, if you cannot use something on Shabbos for whatever reason, then that's considered muksa because it was not meant to be used on Shabbos. So that's something to always keep in mind with muksa. Just think, was there a possibility of me using this item on Shabbos? If there was, then it's not muksa. If there was no use for it on Shabbos, then it is muksa. Right? That's what we're saying with the toilet paper or with the paper towel. Since you're not allowed to use it, so then it becomes muksa. There's no use for it on Shabbos. However, you might say, but maybe I could use it, because if somebody's stuck in the bathroom and they have nothing else to clean themselves with, then you are allowed to tear the toilet paper, not on the perforations, but you're allowed to tear the toilet paper. So maybe that would be considered that maybe it's not muksa. Or I could use the whole roll. If there's a huge spill, I would actually maybe just take the entire roll of paper towels and use it to put it onto the spill. So that's the thing you have to keep in mind, that was there a normal potential of using this item? Okay, so basically I'm going to attempt to go through the question answers. I wrote them down a little bit and see if we can get through this. So the first thing to ask is whether you want to know whether you're allowed to move something that's muksa. So is this something that you normally use on a daily basis, right? For like books, svarim, clothing, jewelry, right? Those are all items that are normally used. So then those are not muksa. Even if I didn't plan on using these things on Shabbos, right? I had all my silverware. Well, so let's hold off on silverware for a minute. But I had all my clothes ready, and I wasn't planning on using any clothing. Then I ran out of clothing, or it got very cold, and I needed to go in the closet and take out a coat that I didn't plan on wearing. Those clothing, books, jewelry are all considered automatic non-muksas, and therefore you're always allowed to move them for whatever reason, even if you don't plan on using them. They're just not muksa. There's a machlokes over cutlery, forks and knives, whether that would theoretically be considered muksa. Now, what type of muksa would it be? Why should it be muksa? So we discussed that everything really starts off as muksa, but the chachamim peeled away isurim as they went through, meaning really everything should not be moved unless necessary. And then the Chacham said, okay, so clothing, books, jewelry, those are things that nobody has it in their head whether they're using, not using it. So therefore, there's no muktzah that applies to that. Cutlery, sometimes you don't plan on using cutlery. So therefore, it theoretically would be muktzah, but if you need it for any reason, then it's not muktzah, that's for sure. Question is, can you move it for no reason? Which we had discussed is like if you're listening to speeches by a simcha, an afruf, and the speeches go long, or sheva brachas, and you start fidgeting. So you're just you just want to move the cutlery on the table or the cup, and you start shaking it or playing with it. Would that be allowed? Because that's not its intended use, and you're not really moving it for any particular reason, which we ended up saying that would be allowed, right? And it's very rare that somebody would have a situation where they just are moving something for no good reason, right? Meaning a chair would also be muktza, but if you have a reason, then you're allowed to move it. So as long as you're moving it for a reason, it's fine. So you almost always have a reason, right? The only thing could maybe be nerves, which the price can say nerves is also a reason. So but that doesn't really apply. So again, books, clothing, jewelry, and cutlery is a debate. That's all that can't possibly be muktzah. So if it falls under that category, you just say yes and you move on. It's not muktzah. I can do whatever I want with it. Okay, now where it gets a little bit more complicated is, okay, now look at the utensil. You say, okay, this utensil is not meant to be used on Shabbos. This utensil is really meant for weekday activities. Like we said, a hammer, tools, phones, radios, lamps, mixers in the kitchen, these type of things, pots potentially, pots that are only exclusively meant to be cooked in. So these are not things that you can use on Shabbos. So since it's something that you don't normally use on Shabbos, so then it's muktza, because you can't really, it's not that normally used on Shabbos. It's if you can't use it on Shabbos, because what the use that you normally do with it is not allowed to be done on Shabbos. I hope I'm being clear with that. Meaning, a hammer you can't build on Shabbos. A pliers you can't build on Shabbos. Rocks, well, no, I'm sorry, not rocks. We're talking about utensils now. We're talking about strictly utensils. So you ask yourself, okay, so again, let's just start again. The first question you're saying is it a utensil that I could potentially use on Shabbos? If the answer to that is yes, then it's not muktza, and you could move it for whatever reason you want. If the answer is no, because it's a utensil that you don't normally use on Shabbos, let's stick with a hammer or pliers. If anybody has any questions or any examples, so please post that. So if your answer is it's something that can't be used on Shabbos, so then you have to ask yourself, what do I need? Why do I want to move it? Right? So then we said that there's two reasons that you'd be allowed to move it. If you need the place where that utensil is, like somebody left the hammer on the table and you need the place on the table, then now you would have a yes answer, and then that would not be muktza, and you can move it. Or if you need the hammer to break open something, a package that's hard to open, or a walnut, or whatever it is, then the answer to that would be yes, then it's not muktza, and then you're allowed to move it. But again, it doesn't mean that it's not muktza. You're allowed to move it to a place that you don't need it, and then you put it down. Now, it doesn't mean you have to quickly run and get it out of your hand. We said that if it's kept in, once it's in your hand, you could carry it upstairs, downstairs, to a neighbor, whatever it is, you'd be allowed to move it to a place that you don't need it. But once you put it down, then it goes back to its muktza status, right? So, it's funny. We always have to judge everybody that to the kafschus. But imagine if you had a hammer and you're walking with the hammer in the street. So your initial reaction would be to go over to the person and say, hey, a hammer is muktza. What are you doing? And it wouldn't dawn on you like, oh, maybe the person is bringing a hammer to their friend's house because the friend can't open walnuts, and they need to open walnuts to put onto a cake or to put into dessert. And that would be perfectly fine. Or maybe you got to get the hammer out of the house because there's no place to put it, and you're embarrassed that it's there. So then you go and you can walk in the street with it. That's no problem, right? So that would be a scenario where you're allowed to move the muktza. But again, once you put it down, unless you need to move it again, it's going to be Muktza. So again, it's going to get back to its Muktza. So again, if the utensil is normally not used for Shabbos, then it's Muktza, but it's allowed if you need the utensil for a Shabbos use, or if you need the place where it is. Now, we did say that there's another scenario where if it's a type of utensil that can't be used on Shabbos for anything. For example, so we said again, a hammer, you can break it open, you can break open a walnut. Fine. But if it's something that you have nothing to use it for, there's nothing you could possibly do with it on Shabbos. For example, see, a pot you could use, because a pot you can cut up a salad and put it into a pot. So that means that if you ended up needing that pot to cut a salad and put it in, then it's fine. Now, obviously, you shouldn't use the pot to put a salad in unless you have no choice, right? If you can use a salad bowl, then that would be better than using a pot. Same thing with the hammer. If you have a nutcracker, so better to use a nutcracker than to use the hammer. But we said you don't have to go into a different room to get the nutcracker. If the hammer is sitting right next to you, you'd be able to use it. Okay. But let's say it's something that you can't possibly use for anything else. Let's just say a smartphone, right? A smartphone. So even though there is really a use because you can use it for an alarm, but let's say it's a smartphone and you're not going to use it to break open a walnut. So can that smartphone be moved if you need the place where it is? So that's a disagreement amongst the Paiskim. So in that case, it'd be better to move the smartphone to the Shinu. Okay. But bottom line is, if necessary, even if the item there's no way it could possibly be used for any other use on Shabbos, there are many that hold you allowed to move it. But since it's a machlokes, it would be better to move it with a shinu, which we'll get to soon. Okay, so that would be the second category. Okay, but let's say it's not a utensil, right? Or 1 second, I'm sorry, let's go back one step. Let's say it is a utensil, but it's an expensive utensil, something that you would never use for anything other than its intended use. For example, we said a knife that somebody uses to shecht animals, or a miles knife. Or it could be very expensive art that's on the wall, and you would never ever move it for anything, unless there was something wrong with it, right? It could also go for expensive dishes that are there for show, or again, some would even say a smartphone. If certain people treat their smartphones with they're very careful with it, they'll never mistreat it. They'll never leave it on the chair, or they'll never leave it around. They always put it back. So for them, that would be considered a kli. Muktza machmas chisaron kiss. It's muktza because you don't ever move it only for its intended use. So if your utensil is that, then you would not be able to move it on Shabbos, even if you need the place where it is. Okay? So you just have to know, I don't think it's so common, but you just have to be aware, because it could happen sometimes you have a break front and you have a expensive piece of silver that you don't ever really use, and you wouldn't ever move it. So then if you really never would use it, then maybe even if the opportunity arises that you need it for whatever reason, it could be that you wouldn't be able to use it because you don't normally use this thing or move this thing. Okay, so that's something else that you have to keep in mind. Now, let's say it's not a utensil. This is all if it's utensils, right? Again, let me just go through it again. The first thing to ask is it a utensil that you use on Shabbos? If it is, it's not Muktza, can't become Muktza, you move for whatever reason. If it's a utensil that can't be moved on Shabbos, so that meaning that can't be used on Shabbos, then you're allowed to move it if you need the place where it is, or if you need the utensil to do something that would be allowed on Shabbos. Fine. And if it's very expensive, that you're scared to move it for other than its intended use, then that would be Muktza if it's not being used for its intended use, right? So now, but then if you look at the Muktza and say, okay, this is not a utensil. So if it's not a utensil, then you have none of the above heterim, and then it's Muktza, right? That would be the end of the line. For example, a rock or a stick or dirt, possibly the paper towel roll, depending how you look at it. Again, if you look at a paper towel roll that it's not a utensil, then a paper towel roll is muktza and you can't move it for the above reasons that were from the reasons that we said before, right? It would be anything. I'm trying to think of other examples that come up of a paper towel roll, blank paper. The poskim in the old days said that blank paper is muksa. I don't believe today. I'm sorry, that really should be muksa for muksa machmas kasar and kiss, meaning the old days paper was expensive and hard to come by. So you would not be able to move a blank piece of paper. Nowadays, I don't believe that applies anymore. Paper is cheap, and that would not be chisar and kiss. But if it's blank paper, what does one have? What could one possibly do with a blank piece of paper on Shabbos, right? So some places say, well, yeah, you can use it to cover over food, maybe, right? So maybe that would make it into a utensil. So you have to know whether it can refit into a utensil or not. If you would potentially use it as a utensil, then it wouldn't be muksa. But let's stick with a rock, sand, dirt. That is muksa. It's not a utensil. Therefore, there's no heter to move it unless you use the shinuis that we'll discuss soon. Okay. Now, if you decide that you do need a rock or sand on Shabbos, it would be mutter to specify before Shabbos that you're going to use it, and then it's okay. So basically, if you're going to want to make rocks for I don't know, to teach. I don't know. You want to teach somebody something about rocks, so you want to take rocks and be meyachid it before Shabbos. So if it's for a long term and you want to take these rocks, so all you have to do before Shabbos is mentally make a mental note in your head that the rocks that are in my yard, I'm taking them to use on Shabbos afternoon, and that's fine. If it's going to be for temporary use, just for this Shabbos, then you actually have to do something to the rock before Shabbos to show that it's not muksa. So you'd have to, I don't know, let's say paint something on it or chisel a little bit out of it, which is probably a little complicated to do, or something like that. Then it would not be muksa for that Shabbos. Okay, so that's obviously from the more strict. It's called muksa machmas gufay, and there's nothing really you can do with that because it's straight muksa, and you'd be able to move it for whatever reason. Is it as a broken piece? The next question to ask, okay, but still a utensil, but is it broken? So the Chachamim said that a broken piece from a utensil you're not allowed to use on Shabbos and it's muksa because we're afraid we're going to allow you to take that broken utensil. We're afraid you might fix it. The common example is a leg falling out from a chair. So if it's constantly falling out, so you're allowed to put it back, no problem. But if it's the first time it fell out, then both the chair and the leg become muksa because we're afraid that you're going to fix the chair. Right? The same thing with glasses. If the arm of a glasses falls out, so then they both become muksa because you're not allowed to fix it. So we're going to allow you to move it, so you might end up fixing it. A more common example of this is the button that falls off of clothing. So it's very common for people to say, oh, button fell off, it's muksa, right? So it really depends on how you use the button. If it's an expensive button and it's specific to that jacket, so it may not be muksa. If it's a cheapo button that you would never end up using, you say, I don't care. So then that button would become muksa. But you would be allowed to kick it, which we're going to get to also. So again, if it's a broken piece of utensil, then you have to know, is there a concern that I might fix the utensil? Then it's a problem. If not, then it's not a problem. And then the next thing is to ask, is this muksa item possibly disgusting? So if it's a utensil, but it's really disgusting, so then it could be it's muksa. And it's called muksa machmas miyas, and that would be muksa. I don't know how many examples we have nowadays, but the example that the place can use is an old, like not a candelabra, but like a lantern that would be used from animal fats and stuff like that, or wax, and those things get very disgusting. So then those would be muksa. But what's tricky with that is because we know that there's something called graf sharei, which is one of the heterim to move muktzah, which we'll get to, is there something that it's so disgusting that you can't function with it in the room, then you're allowed to move it, right? So Muktza machos miyas is something in between, where it's disgusting and you would never use it for anything else. Again, keeping with the rule that just, is this thing, would I use this thing on Shabbos? And if you wouldn't use it on Shabbos, so then it's muktzah. So if it's something that's disgusting, not disgusting enough that you wouldn't want to get it out of the room, but it's just, sitting on a mantle or sitting on a dresser or whatever it is, and it's disgusting, but not disgusting enough that it's really bothering you, so then you would not be able to use that item on Shabbos. All right, so that's basically all the questions that you have to ask yourself. So if at any point the answer would be yes to those questions, then you'd be allowed to move it. If the answer is no, and you end up with the no's all the way through this whole series of questions, then you would say that the item is muktza, and you can't move it unless you move it with some of the shinuyim that we'll discuss soon. Now, another few things before we continue with that is, once something is muktza ben hashmashas, then it stays muktza the entire Shabbos, right? Which is why candles that are lit on Shabbos ben hashmashas, which they are, right? You light candles before Shkia, and they're usually lit. They have to be lit till nightfall. So then those candles, even after they go out, right, are going to be muktzah, and the candelabra that's under it would also be muktzah, right? So let's just stop it for a second, just to clarify why things are muktzah and why they're not. So a candelabra is muktzah based on these questions that we've just asked. Okay, should a candelabra really be muktzah? So it really depends on a few things. First of all, it's definitely a utensil. A candelabra is a utensil. So we said that if you have a utensil, then the utensil is allowed to be moved if you need the place. Okay, so now that the candle went out, so now I want to move my candelabra because I need the table. So why can't I move it? So it might be a problem because if it's very expensive and you would never use it for anything else, so then it's still muktza, machmas, chisar, and kiss, because you're afraid of it getting damaged. But let's say it's not such an expensive candelabra, right? It's one of those temporary things. So the reason why it would be usher is because it was a base, what we call basis l'davra usher. It was a base for something that was muktza bein hashmashas, and since it was holding a candle, which is muktza bein hashmashas, right, when Shabbos started, so therefore the candelabra also stays muktza, right? So that's why. But really, other than that, a candelabra would not be muktza. If you have a cheap candelabra that you never lit candles in on Friday night, and then you decided that you need it because you need the place where that candelabra is, and that can be moved on Shabbos, unless again it's very expensive. If it's very expensive, then you wouldn't be able to, right? So again, anything that's muktza bein hashmashas, even though later on Shabbos it's not muktza, so then it's a problem. It's going to stay muktza. We set an example. I'm trying to remember now, what were the examples that we used for that? Let me check my notes here a second from the previous year. Oh, right, that was it. Laundry in the dryer from before Shabbos, right? So if the laundry, right, wet laundry, as we mentioned before about the towel, is muktza. So if it was going to stay, if you hung the laundry out on a line, like in the summer, people do that. So since we don't know for sure whether it was going to lose its muktza status or not, so therefore, because we don't know if it's going to get dry, so therefore that would be muktza the whole day. Even if it becomes dry Shabbos afternoon, you wouldn't be able to use it. But if it was in a dryer, from before Shabbos, then you know automatically that it's going to be dried. So therefore, that would not be even though it's Muktza ben hashmashas, but it's not going to be Muktza. It's not going to be Muktza for the whole Shabbos, because that was in your mindset. Again, using that same rule, that depends on what's in your mindset. So therefore, it's not going to be Muktza. Okay. So somebody's asking here, why is an expensive button not Muktza and a non-expensive is Muktza? Because the expensive button, you're gonna want to hold on to it. So it's the non-expensive, you're not going to care for it. So it's once it falls off, you're like, oh, okay, I'll find a different one or whatever. It's meaningless to you. An expensive one, then would be okay. There are other places that say, I mean, it's popular that everybody thinks that buttons are automatic Muktza. Other places say that's not even considered a broken utensil, and you'd be allowed to move it. Question is also, even if those that say it's Muktza, is it considered a utensil? And if we say it's not a concern that you might sew it back on, so then it's not a problem. Okay, there's varying opinions, but whatever it is, there are opinions that say that you are allowed to move any type of button, right? I think in the minhag in America is that people think that buttons are Muktza. I don't remember who says what. It must be that Moshe Feinstein held that it's Muktza, but I don't remember for sure. Okay, so then that's again, what's the use of an expensive button that fell off on Shabbos, right? So yes, there are some that say that the use of an expensive button, you would never use it, so therefore it's Muktza. There are those that say that, and others say, well, a cheap button you could theoretically use. You could use it as a toy, right? So there are varying opinions, but the expensive button is you're still going to want to hold on to it. So yeah, but and then some say the opposite. Some say the expensive button is a problem, and some say the cheap button is not a problem. Whatever it is, yeah, obviously it's better if the button falls off. We try and get all the opinions that we can. So then you just kick it. You kick it or you pick it up with a shinoi, and then you would move it, which we'll get to in a few minutes of exactly what would be the best way of doing it. But bottom line is, if you can't do that, then there are makilim on all types of buttons to move them, which can be relied on if necessary. Meaning somebody's by a simcha. Obviously, if you're in an eruv and you're afraid to lose the button, etc., so then there are many makilim that would hold that you could take that button and it's not Muktza. Again, moving it with a shini would be better. So if you're by a kiddush or something and they see you carrying a button and a spoon, either they'll think you're crazy or they'll be very impressed with your knowledge of Hilchos Muktza. Yeah, okay, so that's that. And then we had buses. We had what we call buses l'davar asur, which is what we just were discussing with the candlesticks. So those become a base for the candle that's Muktza, and therefore it's a problem, right? Even though the candle is long out, when by Shabbos morning the candle is long out, and really the candelabra should be okay, but since it was Muktza, ben hashmashas, so then it's the base, and it was carrying the Muktza, so then therefore it becomes Muktza. So again, that one's not so pertinent because most people don't move candelabras. But if you have something on a table and then you want to move something Muktza on the table, you want to move the table, or much more commonly is the drawers, right? Okay, somebody's posting now about the money in the pocket, right? So we're about to discuss that now. We'll get to that because that's a common question. Okay, so what we call basis l'davar asur means it's a base. So the most common is what was just posted, is somebody finds money in a pocket, and the other one is using drawers or freezer drawers or refrigerator doors that have both Muktza on it and non-Muktza. Meaning a refrigerator, usually most things there are not Muktza, but a freezer sometimes can have frozen meat, which we said is Muktza. So can you open up that freezer door or not? So we did say that a freezer door is okay to open even if there's Muktza, but it's better to take the Muktza off if you know for sure you're going to move the door. But if you didn't, then it's fine. Now, how do you define a basis? How do we define a base? Right? So first of all, it has to be put there on purpose. If it's not put there on purpose, then it will not make that whole base as usr. So let's say you have a drawer that you normally keep your fruit in, or you keep your utensils that are not muktza, and then you open the door on Shabbos and you see that there's $1,000 cash in there, which is obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but probably more expensive than your utensils. So now we know that it takes on the status of the most expensive thing. But who asked anybody to put the money there? You have no idea who put the money there, right? They didn't have the rights to put the money there. So therefore, it will not become a base, because again, the first thing is needs to be put there on purpose, which this wasn't. It also has to be in a place that you normally would put the money. So since you would normally not put the money into this drawer, then that can't become a basis either, right? Also, the owner has to place it there, right? And then it also needs, was it there after bein hashmashas? If it came off, it was there in the beginning of right after Shkia, and then it was taken off before bein hashmashas, then it's no problem, right? And then it also, like we said, it needs to be worth more than everything else in the drawer. So basically, those are five things that are five requirements in order for something to become a basis. Again, the five are: was it placed there on purpose, right? Is it a place that you normally would keep these items? Was it there, placed there by the owner? Like if a guest puts it there, then it's not a problem. Was it there at night? And it needs to be worth more, right? Okay, so talking about this, so if you have a drawer that has both muktza and non-muktza in it, and that's meant to be kept there, like what we call junk drawers, and then you need to get something out of it, so it's going to depend. If the item is more expensive, if the muktza item is more expensive than everything else in the drawer, then, and we don't combine things, we just say, is it more expensive than the items, each one individually in the drawer, then it's going to be muktza, and then you can't open that drawer. But again, it has to be placed there on purpose, right? If it's not, the meaning the non-muktza is worth more than the muktza, then the best thing to do is try and knock out the muktza, and then you could use the drawer as you can. But in the drawer, it's very hard to knock out the muktza. So basically, then we would say you're allowed to use the drawer because the non-muktza is worth more than the muktza. Again, if the muktza is worth more than the non-muktza, then you're not allowed to use. Then you're not allowed to use you would not be able to open up that drawer unless you do the shinuyim, which we're about to learn. Okay, the other common one is the money in the pocket, right? So now we just said it depends on how the pocket looks. If the pocket is part of the clothing, like denim, right? Or shirt pockets where the pocket is not a separate entity. It's just an extra cloth that's sewn on, and one end of the pocket is the clothing, then that pocket is considered part of the garment, and the garment is going to be muktza, right? But if it's a separate pocket, which is most pants pockets, jacket pockets, right? So it's a separate entity. So then that's considered a separate entity. And just because the money is in the pocket doesn't mean that the coat is muktza. The pocket would be muktza, but because most money that's found in a coat is worth more than a pocket, I'm assuming, even if it's only $1 or $2, because pockets, I don't think there's worth so much. So you wouldn't be able to use the pocket, but you can still use the coat. Now, are you mechuyev, using the example that was asked here, right? Can you walk home with the coat on and the money in the pocket? Me'ikar adin, you're allowed to, because you're not moving the money directly. What it would be best, if you can, would be to knock out the money in the shul or wherever it was, and then hide it, and then go home. But if you can't because you're scared, so then yes, you're allowed to. That's not called direct movement of the money. That's an indirect movement, and then you would be able to walk home with the money in the pocket and then knock it out when you get home, or just take the coat off. Just take the coat off when you get home. I imagine a lot of people are going to be afraid to take out the money in the shul or wherever it is that you are, because you're afraid that it's going to get taken. So it obviously would depend on how much money is there too. Again, the best thing to do would be knock it out and then hide it by kicking it, because you're allowed to kick Muktza. And if not, then you can just go home. You can go home with it. Okay. Fine. So that's basically all the halachas of what things are Muktza. Now let's just discuss how you can move. What are the most mutter ways to move Muktza? So one we already discussed, which is if it's a utensil, you're allowed to move it if you need the place where the utensil is, or if you need the utensil for another reason, like a hammer to break open the nuts. So that's a heter right away. Another heter is if it's going to be dangerous. If the item, let's say it's rocks, somebody spills rocks in a dining room and there's people going to step on it and they might trip. If there's elderly, or something might get a splinter from a piece of wood, etc., then those are allowed to be moved too, even though those are full Muktza. Right? That's another heter. Another third heter is if it's really disgusting and it's really, really bothering you, then you'd be allowed to move it. You'd be allowed to move it because in a regular way, just pick it up and move it. You don't have to do it even with a shinoi because it's something disgusting, and the Chachamim again had the wherewithal to say that you let him move something that's disgusting. But again, if it's tolerable, then really you really shouldn't move it. Fine. Yeah, and then so that's that. Then the final two ways that you can move any type of Muktza is, and there's two ways, so it gets a little bit confusing. One is called tiltul min hatzad. That's the Lashon Kodesh for it. The Hebrew is tiltul min hatzad. You can carry it from the side, which again we use an example of carrying the button with a spoon, or carrying the toilet paper also with a spoon if you wanted to move it. So tiltul min hatzad is only mutter where you're moving it. See, that's why the examples that I just gave maybe are not so good, because you can move any Muktza you want. Doesn't make a difference. It could be rocks, it could be dirt, it could be trees, it could be whatever it is. You could move it min hatzad, but not for the Muktza's sake. You can't move it that way unless it's for your sake. Like using the example of the toilet paper, if you're afraid somebody's going to use it, so you want to put it away, so that's moving it for your sake. But if it's, let's say, some water spilled and it's gonna hit the toilet paper and then it's gonna ruin the toilet paper, so then you're moving it for the toilet paper's sake, then you would not be able to move it with min hatzad, which means moving it with, let's say, a fork or something else. So again, you can move things min hatzad, but only if it's for your sake. If it's for the Muktza's sake, you're not allowed to. So another example, if you realize that you left your hammer outside and it's about to start raining, right? You would not be able to move that hammer min hatzad, but let's say taking a fork or a knife and moving it that way, right? Or any other way of min hatzad, right? But if you're moving it for your own sake, then it's okay. So that's one way. The other way is more lenient, and that's called tiltul begufay, moving it with your body, but not with your standard body, meaning with your hands. If you can move it with your body, you can move any Muktza for whatever reason with any part of your body that it's not normally moved. So obviously kicking it would be the easiest thing. So this hammer that you left outside and it's about to start raining, so then you would be allowed to move the hammer by kicking it, right? So like somebody asked today that they got an Amazon delivery of something Muktza, they want to can move it in. So the answer is, the way we paskin, yes, you can kick it in. You would not be able to move it with like a fork and a spoon or something like that min hatzad, because you're moving it for the sake of the Muktza. But you would be allowed to move it with your foot by kicking it in. So the same thing we said with the buttons. If you want to move the buttons or the money on the floor, you can kick it with your feet or you can move with your elbows, as long as you're moving it differently than you would normally move it. Okay, that's your number one heter to move muksa, which we're going to want you to do in all these scenarios where there's a machlokes, like the buttons or the paper towels. So there's no reason not to move it by kicking it or moving it with the elbows, etc., because why should you get involved in machlokes? Why wouldn't you just move it in the way that would work according to all opinions? Even though we said that the Chazon Ish says you're not allowed to kick things in, only if it's like in your way. I mean, if you're walking in the house and there's a muktzah item right in front of you, so you kick it as you're walking, then that would be okay according to the Chazon Ish. But otherwise, he says no. But it seems like the majority go with the Mishnah Berurah on this and say that you'd be allowed to kick it in. So again, that's the easiest way. The back of the hand is debatable if that's really a way to move it. So, but moving with your elbows is fine. That's for sure fine. Unless the regular way to move it is with your feet. Like we said, a ball, which may be muktza, a normal way to move a ball, I guess a soccer ball, is to kick it. So if you hold it, it's muktza, because it's also to play ball, which we don't. But let's say you were going with the opinions that did, or maybe marbles maybe also. So the way to move them is with your feet and with your hands. So then kicking it with your feet would be more of a problem. Right, but again, if you have left a phone on a bed or money on a bed, so knocking it off by just taking the blanket and moving it like that would be fine, because you're not moving that muktza for the muktza's sake, you're moving it for your sake. So then that any type of situation like that is you just move it from the side. And if it's really muktza and you're moving it for the muktza's sake, then you would be allowed to move it by kicking it, right? So those are basically your heterim to move muktza. I hope that's clear. And if there's any questions, please post them now, because that would be it. So I see there's another question here. So if there's a pocket that had part of the jacket with a lot of money, would the jacket be? Yes, the jacket can be, again, depending on what type of pocket it is. And what I understand, most jacket pockets are separate. They're separate. Well, actually, I'm wearing a jacket, right? So if you take this, this is considered its own pocket. It's not considered, right? It has its own individual, it has a lining. So therefore, if there was money found in this pocket, the pocket would become muktza. But since the pocket is sewn into the jacket, then the jacket will not become muktza, so it would be okay. But if it would be like a shirt pocket, right, which this is part of the shirt, the pocket's part of the shirt, then the entire shirt would become muktza. But again, that would only be if somebody placed the money in there on purpose. If the money was not placed there on purpose, then it was placed there by mistake, then you just knock out the money, and then it will not be muktza. Okay, so I guess that's it. I hope this was understandable. Contact me privately if you have any questions, please. So again, next week, no share, and probably the next week after that, no share. And I'm not sure of a subject. If anybody has any suggestions of what subject, feel free to, or you could email also Mr. Jacobs. I don't know how many people emailed. What was it again? If you don't mind posting it, okay. ejacobs@hank.org. ejacobs, EJACOBS @hank.org. I was thinking maybe opening packages, or candle lighting. What else? I think opening packages actually comes up a lot. It could be on other subjects too. We could do kashrus. I'm actually been getting a lot of questions lately about cleaning ladies messing up in the kitchen. If anybody thinks that. There was also one subject for shoyim, which is mikveh preparation, because there's a lot of confusion about what has to be done, what doesn't have to be done. I was thinking maybe to do a 1 week on that, but okay, I don't know. Suggestions are welcome. But again, no share next week, and I guess I'll be in touch the next week after that. Okay, everybody should have a good tvach and a good yar, and we should hear only good news.